Alright, so what I've done here is I've taken a large piece of Vero board, or strip board is the more generic term, and I've cut it down to match the dimensions of the circuit we're working on. And you'll see these red marks here. These are corresponding to these red squares with red dots in them. Those are going to be the cuts in our circuit to cut the traces of the copper on the back. When I make these marks, I'm looking at the non-copper side, the side that will actually have the components on it, and I need to transfer those to the copper side to make those cuts. So I'm going to take a 1/16 drill bit, drill through everywhere I've got a red mark. I'll just do one here. That will enlarge that hole enough that once I flip this board, you probably can't see it, but it's easy to see in real life that that hole is a little bit larger, indicating that's where there needs to be a cut. So I'll take a 3/16 drill bit on the copper side. Once I've transferred all those to the back, I'll kind of gently push it into that hole, and just by hand, don't use a drill for this part, just drill maybe 6 turns, 5 or 6 turns. You'll get the hang of it after a while. And can you focus on that? And you'll see now that that has broken the copper there, but the 3/16 is a great size because it won't interfere with the ones above and below it. And I've done this one as well. So this is the same circuit, and this I've drilled through and I've done all of that transferring here. So now all these are cut on the back side. So certain components aren't shorting each other out, and that's what gives us our basic circuit design. Thing to remember is when you're cutting this Vero or strip board to size, you need to make sure, you'll see here on this image, that these lines, these copper traces go side to side. They're horizontal. So as you're making your measurements and your cuts, you want to make sure that that is the same on this board and you don't have them turned running vertical. Then it will not work at all. Okay, so to start, I need to get a piece. This is a larger piece of Vero / strip board that I need to cut to the dimensions for our circuit. Keep in mind as you're counting that up here you're going to have holes, and those perforations don't go all the way to the edge, and on the copper side there is no copper there, so you have to account for that as you're making these measurements. I've already made my measurements, and what I do is you count, let's say 11 counts, and then I use these breaking pliers. I go to the next set of perforations beyond what I need, and then I clamp those on like that. It's kind of hard to see, but they're like vice grips, and then you can take them and break back and forth, and it will basically break along your weak point. It's a little tough for me to film there, but I'm going to go ahead and break the rest on these green lines and get it down to the dimensions we need. Okay, once we get those red dots transferred to the back and get those copper traces cut, the next thing, and we go in order of height, so the next thing that's going to be closest to the board are these blue lines, which are actually just going to be jumper, basically. They just are going to help the circuit connect certain areas together. So the first one we're going to do is this small one that just goes from here to the one below it. And I'll be 1 second and I'll show you that going in. Jumper wires. I strip down Cat 6 cable to the individual cables, and then I strip the shielding off, so I've just got bare copper cable. I'll then put it through here, which is going to be tough to see, so I can't do all this at once. But I'll put it through just those 2 holes there. So now, sorry Dave, you should be able to see it there at the top, that little bit of copper that's just connecting those 2 points together. And then I use this, which is like poster tack for hanging posters on your wall. I put it on a little piece of wood so it's soft, and then I flip my pieces over like this, and that actually will kind of stick there so it doesn't move around, and it'll hold everything in place while I solder. I like it a lot better than helping hands and other things. And I'm going to do my best to solder this joint with the phone here. I don't know if it's going to be worthwhile at all. You'll have to excuse my skill because I'm really juggling a lot to get this on. But a little bit on the bit, touch, add a little solder, and back off. And that should be an alright joint. You know, and you just want to be careful that you're not holding it there. You see it's right next to the cut we made, so that's going to keep it from touching anything over here on, sorry, I'm backwards in the mirror image. Keeps it from touching anything on this side of the board. But you get just enough solder to make your connection, but you don't want so much that you flow and cover the holes next to it, because if you have to start desoldering, it can be a mess. So you do have to be a little careful not to do too much. So I'll do one more and then give me 1 second. All right, now I've got all of my jumpers in. I just basically mapped them with the blue Sharpie, put them in, and I know this might seem a little overkill to even say this, but where I cut mine, you know, your pieces go through, and when it's time to cut the legs off, I just go down and basically let it sit right on top of that joint and then cut it there. So afterwards, you're left with these basically like little pyramid triangle kind of joints is what you're left with, that should sit just on the one you're soldering and not extend into the holes next to it. So my tip I'm using right now is really garbage. I meant to buy one after work today, so I'm doing the best I can to make sense of this with the tip I've got on the iron. But so our next step is going to be our resistors, which are going to be these blue rectangles, 1K, 560K, 560, 18, and all those are going to be the same physical size. We just have to make sure that we've got the right value in the right place. So I'm going to go ahead and just like those, I'm going to solder those in. And all of this, what you really want to do, especially with these jumpers, is have them tight up against the board, so they're not floating out, they're not going to move or hit anything else, keeping those nice and tight, and everything going in, you want it to sit nice and flush to the board. So let me get the resistors on, and I will be back. All right, so I've now got all 6 resistors on and in place. See here, then in the background where they fall. So you're just going to go by the numbers on that. They are technically color-coded, but, you know, that's a lot of mess to go through and figure out. I've labeled everything. I've given you like 3 times the amount for each value. I've just written down 560K the exact way it's going to go on here. Now, the next thing, like I said, we're going to go by height. So the next thing we're going to do is our diodes. So D1, D2, D3. The important things with the diode is to note they have polarity. So the stripe side is going to correspond on the diode itself. The diode will have a line on one side, and you'll want to make sure that the orientation is the same way that it is on the board. I'll get some of those on there and be back with you. Okay, the diodes are on the board, and as you can see right there, there's a little black line on one side. This one's up, the next one to the left is down, this one over here is up. So from there, looking at our layout, the next thing we're going to do is our sockets. So our transistors are socketed. These 2 capacitors I show, those little black circles, I generally put in for sockets so we can test things. We're not going to do that. The only sockets we're going to put on this board are where it says EBC, CBE. That way we don't take a risk of burning up transistors, so that'll let you just kind of plug in the transistors once we're done without any risk of harm. One moment and I will show you the sockets. Transistors, these are the sockets I use. I buy them in like a strip, they're 40 count strips, and then I'll just use wire cutters and snip them to the length I need. For you, I'm going to just go ahead and cut them down to 3. And again, there'll be extra ones for you, but I don't think I can hold the camera and do that. But instead of 40, there'll be 2 sets of 3. One moment. Okay, for the sockets, before we solder, we're just going to set them in place. And because these are thin and they sit higher, what I'll do in this case is probably put them both in. Looks like the other one goes right here. I'll put them both in, so then when I flip them upside down on this, they'll actually help balance the board and hold everything where it's supposed to be. And I just want to double check I got 3 holes under that one, which is right. Make sure everything's lined up, and instead of trying to flip this over, I'll take this and set it down. I'm going to set it down on top of this like that and flip it over that way. Now, and it's probably going to be really difficult to see, but right here by my finger, you can see them come through. And you just want to kind of shift left, right, make sure they're sticking straight up, and then very carefully solder those in place. I definitely can't do this with the phone, so one moment. All right, now our sockets are in place. That you can see the kind of gold openings there on that. So when it's time for the transistors, we'll just cut those down a little bit and they'll plug right in. That way, if you put them in backwards, you can switch it around. If you want to try different transistors, you can take them out, put them in without having to go back and make a mess trying to unsolder, resolder. Anything that you think you might have to change for testing on a board is always good to socket. IC chips, if you open up the board or the pedal I just made you, there's a ton of stuff socketed in there, especially with like a chip with 16 legs, because you're going to be hard pressed to get it unsoldered and pulled out of there without destroying something. Now, moving on, after our sockets, which were here and here, we're going to go to our capacitors. We're going to start with our smallest ones, which are going to be these 2 yellow ones. For me and a lot of people, we use a shape like that oval and a different, like lighter color to signify your smaller ceramic capacitors, like a 47 PF or a 470 PF. Make sure you don't confuse those when you're putting them on the board. And then from there, we'll do those 2 first, because again, they're shortest. And we can still use our kind of clay board to hold things in place. And then after that, we'll move up to the larger ones. And with these larger film capacitors, I go in order of size. So 100 or 22 is going to be our smallest, then the 100s, and then the 220s, because they progressively get larger based on their value. These 2 small ones are going to be about the same size, so your order doesn't matter there, just as long as they're in the right place. I'll start there. I'll do those first 2, let you see it, and then I'll go ahead and come back and fill in these orange larger film capacitors.